Welcome back to the conversation. Now, so much seems to be happening in Nigeria's manufacturing sector as it faces severe challenges due to soaring energy costs. Electricity tariffs have risen by 212%, while petrol prices increased by 430% in 1 year. Inadequate electricity supply and high diesel costs, are majorly eating up the 80% of profits for manufacturers and businesses, further crippling these businesses. Now, if you recall, in 2023, over 800 companies shut down, with many more still struggling. You have Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, that's MAN, warning of low sales, inventory buildups, shutdowns, and job losses. They also argue about rising interest rates, exchange rates, inflation, and fuel scarcity, further exacerbating the sector's struggles. Now, MAN is actually urging urgent government action in order to address these challenges. And just before we introduce our guests, I'd like to take us back to, the presidential inaugural address where our president, President Tinubu, had said that his administration will target a higher GDP growth in 3 steps. First of all, he talked about budgetary reform that will stimulate the economy without engendering inflation. Secondly, he talked about industrial policy that will utilize the full range of fiscal measures to promote domestic manufacturing and also lessen import dependency. And thirdly, he talked about accessible and affordable electricity in businesses and homes alike. And these 3 steps, were some of the major steps that will be taken to boost our economy. Now, just before we ask this question in regards to this, I would like to introduce, our guest joining us live. We have Ogbonna Ukuku, an economic development expert in Abuja. Good evening, Ogbonna. Thank you so much for joining me at this time.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so let me go back to the question that I wanted to ask as regards, the steps that this administration had actually promised businesses during President Tinubu's inaugural speech. Have any of these steps been achieved, in your opinion?
Now, this is where I think this is where we get it all mixed up, right? So, generally speaking, when a government makes a promise, so there are steps you must take to be able to actualize your promises. Because when it comes to being productive, it takes a whole lot. I mean, there are lots of things you must take care of. There are things that exist that function within that ecosystem that you must work around to make sure that they work. Now, if you're looking at if it's budgetary cycle, all you just need to do is to allocate funds, and then the funds go into, let's say, some infrastructure or some purchases. But when it comes to economic growth, it's a big difference. The dynamics are a big difference. First things first, you have to look at what are the issues that manufacturers are having. So when it comes to industrialization, you do your needs analysis around the cost of finance, cost of manufacturing, the taxes, if there are double taxations or there are things that impede development when it comes to manufacturing. What's your raw material supply strategy? Are there things that are within the circumference that will help supply your raw material? What are even those raw materials that you need? Let's look at when we go on the sectorial areas and say, okay, when it comes to agriculture, you want to produce this. What are the things you need? So there are a lot of work that needs to be done within the entire ecosystem for you to be able to distill what the issues are. Now, energy cost is very primary, is very key, because those are the things that will lead to supply shocks, and all of that. So if you ask directly, have the government been able to solve the problem, meet up to the promises? I will answer you yes, because they've started taking the steps that they need to take. Though they are very difficult steps, are there better ways that those steps can be taken? Of course there are. Because if you put 300 economists in the room, they'll have different ways to achieve the same, solution. But is this the only way that would have been able to do it? No. But is this the right thing to do? Of course it is. Because if you look at countries like China that did what we're doing today, when they did it many years ago, They locked their borders. They were able to close down their borders and say, come. See, we must be able to, curb our taste gland. We must be able to say we can't continue to be a third world country with a first world appetite. So there are certain things we must make do with for now, because one, like I mentioned, the raw material supply strategy. It's so painful that in a country where from the Zamfara down to Lagos State, there's no single plant where they make glucose syrup, for example. Glucose syrup is the raw material you need to make candy. That's tom-tom, sweets, like we popularly call it in Nigeria. There is no single factory where they make that. Candy is made up of 4 things: water, glucose syrup, coloration, and flavoring. These 4 things. And guess what? The other 3 comes from other parts of the world.
Well, this is actually
Turkey,
the
China.
same thing, Ogbonna, this is actually the same thing we're talking about, because, I remember back then growing up, we had so many of some of these manufacturing, companies, talking about the candy companies as well. And, about what does that say about the fact that, this particular sector had seen over 800 companies shut down in 2023 alone, and more have actually shut down after that, and others are still struggling. What do you have to say about that as well?
Yeah, that's what I was heading there. I was heading there to tell you. So this is the problem. So what we have here, we don't have manufacturers in Nigeria. We have couplers. We have we have assembling plants in Nigeria. We don't have manufacturers, because these are the things that control the cost of manufacturing. Apart from energy cost, the major thing is your input, which is your raw material. So if you are importing raw material, that means you're going to be depending on FX to bring in your raw materials. I was using candy as an example to show you how bad, because if we don't understand, if we don't x-ray it, some people would just sit down and say, nothing is being done. Of course, the only way things can be done is if we're able to understand what the problems are. Because if you are getting out of the 4 items you need, and you're getting 3 from outside Nigeria, that means the only one you get here is water. So what are you doing? You're just assembling candy in Nigeria. When it comes to the pharmaceutical industry, it's the same. As generic as Panadol is, the API with the active pharmaceutical ingredient is imported from India. So what these big companies you hear do is they assemble Panadol. So if we're not been able to tell ourselves the truth, so let's go back to the basics. So for you to manufacture properly, there are a few things you must take care of. I keep saying it. Your raw material supply strategy is the first thing you must focus on. So that means you have to go back to agriculture. You must look at how to function. Because I was telling you, I was about to end on the glucose syrup issue, because glucose syrup is actually cassava. It's cassava. So if you're not able to get cassava to a point where you'll be able to produce those things that you need, ethanol is used in the beverage industry. It's so much that we have not done so much. And then if you come back to the agriculture itself, now you begin to ask, okay, let's even take cassava, for example. Nigeria is the largest producer of cassava in the world.
Of course.
And Nigeria earns less than $100 million from cassava. Now, the second largest producer of cassava in the world, Thailand, earns about $2 billion from the same cassava. What does that tell you? Productivity. We are not productive. So when associations like MAN come out and they start to shout, I'm asking, excuse me, MAN, have we ever been able to put pressure on government? Let's see how we can source raw materials locally. Now, I'm not that I'm excusing anyone when it comes to energy costs. Yes, we're going to go to that sector. But these are the issues. Until you're able to solve your problems, the problems will continue to be there. And that's the only way we are going to solve our problem. Energy we're talking about. Do you know what it takes, man, for somebody to actually own a power plant in Nigeria to be able to generate electricity? I've never seen it anywhere in the world. Where you have bureaucratic red tapes, you need to interface with at least 8 different organizations that are not related in any way. Nigerian Gas Company, NBC, NERC, Ministry of Environment, you have to get the land from the state. I've never seen this kind of thing before. So what I'm trying to say in essence, until you're able to be able to narrow down some of these issues and then begin to solve them one after the other. So a lot of people will continue to complain until we now come together and say, okay, let's begin to solve our problems. And our problems Yes, they look enormous, but I mean, these are things that can be solved if we are really serious about solving them.
Oh, and then more businesses will also continue to shut down if this is not fixed. Now, still talking about the shutdown of businesses because, so far, from what I know, so many businesses are tired. Now, I want you to go ahead and tell us, how do you think that this shutdown will affect Nigeria's economic growth trajectory? And I'm speaking of in terms of employment, sectoral contributions to GDP, investment climate, and inflows. And even speaking of investment, we're also aware that most of the multinational companies have also left Nigeria. So please speak to us.
I think when it comes to multinationals, I don't like people using the word they are leaving. They're actually divesting. So some of them have seen that we can't just be here, and we've been able to. We have grown grown capacity of local companies. Local companies have grown enough capacity to be able to deal. So, and of course, there are a lot of other companies. They might not be the known IOCs who are divesting. So other people are taking over those assets, and these are people who are also willing to add value to some of the assets that they are actually acquiring, because some investors, what they look at is how to maximize profits. It will be important for me to mention at this point, not to mention names, some of the IOCs who are divesting and leaving Nigeria, they all have refineries in other countries. So I've always asked, why is it that they don't have refineries here? If you go to Jurong Island in Singapore, most of those companies have refineries in Jurong Island. So which speaks to efficiency. So that brings me to what drives investment. Investors are looking for resources, both natural and human resources. They are looking for markets, not population. Market between market and population is just a number of people in the place, and the market is actually those who have the disposable income to actually assimilate what you have to bring to the market. Number 4 is strategic assets, and then the last one, which is the most important part, is the efficiency in your system. Now, what has happened? They tell you manufacturing that you need to size your factory or your manufacturing base close to a raw material. No. Jurong Island proved everybody wrong. In Jurong Island, all they have there is petrochemical plants, refineries. Everybody that is there doing business there, I'm talking about an investment of over 90 billion, turnover over $90 billion in all the raw material they need is hydrocarbon, and the closest hydrocarbon to Jurong Island is actually a pipeline from Indonesia to Jurong Island, about 650-kilometer pipeline. What does that tell you? The efficiency is everything, is not the natural resources. So that's enough for you. That's enough to turn the entire process upside down. So if you notice, when it comes to ease of doing business, is either Iceland or Singapore comes first. Why? Because they've been able to create a system where if you're an investor, you can walk into Jurong Island today, and then you know how long it's going to take you to start business, and you know when your profit will start coming. So if you don't, is it when you have to deal with the customs here, you have to deal with one agency or the other, so there's so much that has to be done. So I think what it is that a lot has gone wrong, that we need to, bring Nigeria back to be on track. So that's when we begin to see those significant strides. We're still talking about railways. So that means basic things. We're still talking about building roads in Nigeria. So if you see what the government is trying to do, which I understand where they're heading at, so they're trying to take the monies and then, take the monies that they were, invariably that they were using for previous governments have used for subsidy to now put in infrastructure. So until we're able to have those basic base, it will be difficult for things to move forward.
All right. Ogbonna.
So that is
yeah. Let's now go back to the hike and increase in petrol and also energy. Now, if you actually watch the NESG at 30, one of the key things that was actually talked about is the need for collaborative action for growth, competitiveness, and stability. And it reminds me of something that MAN's Director General actually stated. That the exponential increase in the face of inadequate electricity, electricity supply is inimical to the competitiveness of Nigerian products and businesses. Now, how has the 430% increase in petrol prices and 212% hike in electricity tariffs affected these manufacturers?
Of course, it's going to affect the manufacturers negatively, because I know when I started my conversation, I was able to, clearly explain some of these things. One, because you see, everything about, high cost in energy costs, the high cost, when it comes to energy supply, it affects manufacturing because, your cost of production goes higher. But let's say we had a good structured financial engineering structure where the interest rate to manufacturers are targeted and, you're getting funds at single digits, that will help. So in your opening shot, you said, that, the energy cost is actually eroding about 80% of their profits.
Exactly.
So let's say we have been able to get this one when it comes to financial engineering, you've been able to get, the finances targeted at manufacturers, and then, it helps reduce. So the percentage will keep dropping and it keeps dropping that way. Then again, if you are able to I think at this point, what we need to do is to have targeted support strategy, which means if a manufacturer, so we need to do a proper indexing of our industries, understand those who need support and those who don't need support. Of course, we need to also talk about using gas for energy in all some of these manufacturing bays, so we need to talk about how to build economic zones, which was one of the things that we've been promoting ever since. How come those things have not come upstream? So if we had where there are shared facilities, so it makes life a lot easier. So it begins to drop your cost of production. But coming back to why this cost in energy, the increase in energy costs. So these are the dynamics. So I was trying to explain earlier how it's a bit difficult for people to play in that energy sector when it comes to power. Now, it's difficult because if you are able to go through getting the license and then it's only a company called MBET, because power is not something you produce and put in a shelf or go to a shop and say, okay, sell this power for me. Somebody has to be able to give you a guarantee that they're going to purchase this power from you, which has to be a Nigerian bulk electricity company. So if they now come to buy the power that you're producing, and then the cost they are giving you is not the cost, the actual, is not, the matrix is not right. It doesn't, it doesn't give you the actual cost. So it makes it difficult for any foreign investor or local investor to want to go into power, because if the power holding companies are not selling at the appropriate cost, it makes it difficult for a person that is generating to generate. Don't forget, everybody that is generating is actually buying natural gas at a cost, and that cost is in US dollar. So every time the cost of US dollar goes up, the person that is generating is going to affect his cost of input. So it moves down that way, goes down the spiral until it gets to the consumer. So these are the dynamics that are available. So whatever we need to do to reduce costs within those areas where we have control, the areas where we have control, that's where I think we should focus on, because there are things we don't have control over.
But let's not also forget that all these that you've actually said is determinant, on the impact of interest rates and also exchange rates, which we actually know is also one of the challenges that these manufacturers are also facing.
Yeah, like I said, they will face those issues because one, like I said earlier, if your input as a manufacturer, I gave you simple illustrations. If your inputs are FX based, it becomes a problem. So now let's say someone who has been manufacturing, a big company, the candy I mentioned here is being manufactured by a very big company. So let's say 5 years ago, the company, in their vision had actually discussed or, programmed to have a backward integration. Probably by now, they probably would have invested in cassava farms or, gone into partnership with Cassava Growers Association, so that by now we probably will have, a production line for glucose syrup, which is actually 80% of what they use to make a single candy. So for me, it's just an opener. Yes, it will affect manufacturers in the immediate, but it's also on the flip side, it has the capacity to grow your economy when it comes to productivity. Because what you need to do is pay attention, partner more with government, state, local, because I mean, again, local government and state government have more funds in their hands. So it is time for those companies, those big companies, to actually look at backward integration. Because if they do a backward integration, so the amount of money they will be spending on foreign exchange to buy raw materials would actually go into the economy, and then those shocks won't affect them. The FX shocks won't be so much on them.
Okay.
So that's what I think. At this point, we need to begin to think of how to, the stability that the Nigerian Economic Summit Group is talking about will only come. The competitiveness will come when we begin to look at, what the things that we can actually do here locally, and stop playing pranks or playing jokes or joking with our lifelines. Because when it comes to economic development, there are lifelines given to you by nature. I call them lifelines because these are things nature has given to you. Until you take advantage of them, you can't even play in the global space.
Okay, and it has to do with productivity. We need to be productive ourselves and, collaborate with the government, which is something I know a lot of these manufacturing businesses have tried to do or even done. But, some time ago, the president said that interest rates, need to be reduced to increase investment and consumer purchasing in ways that sustain the economy, at a higher level. Now, it's a good thing that you've actually analyzed a bit the impact of the inflation and exchange rate fluctuations, and also the interest rates. But no, you haven't actually spoken about the interest rates. And earlier you did talk about, the fact that one of the challenges, that might be responsible for manufacturers, not making it, might have to do with, too much taxations. And we're seeing that, the VAT is about to be increased. There's some taxes that are still, that are coming up when it comes to some of these businesses, especially when you go to importation of cars. There's so many taxes when it comes to that. And all these affect these manufacturers and affect businesses in general in Nigeria. So tell us, some critics have also actually said that the government seems to be focusing more on other sectors rather than the manufacturing sectors. Do you agree with this, what the critics have actually said, first of all?
I think by the time maybe some of the critics, when they listen to this piece, might help them a whole lot, unless they're just trying to hide from the reality. Like I said earlier, if you depend on FX for manufacturing in Nigeria, you will always have those shocks will affect you. But if you are manufacturing, why is it that companies that probably that depend on some local things that are made locally are not complaining? Because they can't complain so much. Yes, they will complain when it comes to supply shocks that will happen due to these energy costs, but their complaints won't be as much as those who depend solely on importation when it comes to raw material. But I mean,
and you're actually talking about, these raw materials, and earlier you talked about cassava. Not forgetting that when it comes to cassava comes from, some of these farms, in some of these states actually facing serious challenges when it comes to security as well. And until that is tackled, raw materials might not, it might be very, very difficult for them to actually be able to access some of these raw materials.
So yeah, that's taking us to another part of the economy, which is security. Now, it will be unfair for us to say when it comes to cassava. I mean, I don't like to isolate crops like that, because I mean some people have been affected truly, due to security. Those who operate a bit more in the north and in the middle belt. But when it comes to cassava, I think it's something that those are crops that grow more in the south. So yes, there are pockets of issues that happen now and here and there. But I think each security of the chief security officers of each of the states should take ownership when it comes to security. I say this because most of the time when there are issues, they'll say, no, every instruction comes from the IG. But I ask a very simple question. So all of them that have conducted local government elections, how come the IG did not instruct their police commissioners on what the commissioners listened to them, and then the elections, went their way? So, sometimes I don't like to go into that, conversation. So let's stay on the economy. But when it has to do with security, security. Security is something that I know is everybody's business, but I mean more on the government. Because the government must pay attention. I will always advise government they should pay attention if we must grow this economy. But that does not mean that the bad people are as if we're in a failed state where the bad people have chased away everybody. They are now the ones occupying. I mean, we had in Nigeria that those kind of things happened in the past when Boko Haram took over some areas in the north, but that is not the situation now. There are still areas where I think we hide under we hide under certain excuses when we want to express our mediocrity. The point still remains that in Kogi, Ekiti, Abia, Imo, some parts of rivers, when it comes to Elelewan, Ogoni area, all the way down to leave Lagos State out of it, leave Ogun State, some part of Ogun State. But when it comes to Oyo State, you can actually cultivate at least 200,000 hectares of cassava farm if you want to. But like I said, it's something, so it has to happen in clusters. There has to be a state, there has to be an agreement. You see, these things don't function in isolation. So you can't work in silos. There has to be that confluence. We all must sit down and say, okay, these are the crops we must pay attention to. And again, like I always advise, the government finance institutions in Nigeria, you spoke about increase in interest rates earlier. So those things must happen because you have to also see how you must hold for you to be able to, because inflation is also high. Because when you tighten interest rate, that's actually how one of the ways or the best way, to see how you can, drive your inflation down. But while holding or while tightening, you must use the tool of your different finance institutions. This is very key because when it comes to those government-owned institutions like Nexim Bank, like the Bank of Industry, Bank of Agriculture, you should fund them adequately so that they'll be able to support some of these areas. Some sector-specific financial structuring that will help in industrializing Nigeria.
Okay, so now just before we let you go, Ogbonna, can you discuss the possible outcomes, of continued neglect of this particular sector, talking about manufacturing sector, on Nigeria's, economic diversification efforts if these challenges continue to persist?
You can't create jobs if you don't pay attention to your manufacturing sector. You can't you can't grow any economy without supporting the manufacturing sector, because there are mega, there are the smaller ones. So all this, these are the things. You can't create employment. So the productivity cannot happen without them, really, because these are things you must pay attention, but you must be very strategic. I keep saying that you must be very strategic. Structure things, because if you are not strategic, if you are not intentional, you can never get results. If I use a small city in a province that's like a local government or a state in China, the entire buttons used in apparel manufacturing in the entire world, 60% comes from a particular province in China. Do you know what that means? They call the place a button city in China.
Yeah.
I've been there. Everywhere you turn, you see button. Why? Because they paid attention. And as soon as they were strategic, they knew the raw materials to focus on. They knew the infrastructure to work on. They knew what to do. So that's the essence of governance. That's the essence of the Manufacturers Association. They should have a sit down with the government. They can bring in strategic thinkers. Those who are, those who are experts in, financial engineering, and then we'll all sit down and have a way to go and have a direction. Instead of us, these things will happen, but we must work towards them to make sure that we get them to work.
All right, well, thank you so much, Ogbonna Ukuku, economic development expert, for speaking to us on this. Thank you.
All right, thank you for having me.